He hunted them down like animals. In the same hallways he once wandered as a struggling student. 7 minutes, 10 lives, and a silence that would haunt Austria long after the last shot was fired. Arthur A., 21 years old, wasn't someone people paid attention to. No arrests, no violence, just a quiet gamer from Graz with a growing obsession: violent games, online forums, and the twisted legacy of real-life school massacres like Columbine. Then, on a Tuesday morning, he walked back into his former high school carrying a shotgun and a pistol, and turned the building into a war zone. But the horror didn't end there. As Austria lit candles and buried its dead, something else happened. And suddenly, a grieving country was left to wonder. Was Arthur acting alone, or had his darkness already started to spread? This is the obsessed gamer who slaughtered 10 students for fame. June 10th, 2025 started off like any regular Tuesday at Borg High School in Graz, Austria. You had students in classrooms, some taking their finals, others just trying to get through the day. Nothing out of the ordinary, just a typical school morning. In one classroom, 2 best friends, 15-year-old Hannah A. and Leah Barjami, were up front giving a presentation. Some classmates were paying attention, others were mentally checked out, probably daydreaming about summer break. It felt like any other day. But it wasn't, because hanging silently over that school was something no one could have imagined. At exactly 9:43 a.m., a man walked through the school doors, alone, dressed in black military-style pants and jump boots. He headed straight to a 3rd-floor bathroom. Once inside, he began to transform. From a backpack, he pulled out a pistol and a sawed-off over-under shotgun. In less than 10 minutes, he was fully armed, fully prepared, and completely silent. At 9:57 a.m., everything changed. The man stormed a classroom on the 2nd floor. No one even had time to scream. Hannah and Leah were the first to go down. They never had a chance. Their classmates and teacher could only watch in horror as the gunman opened fire without warning, bullets flying in every direction. Panic erupted, desks toppled, screams filled the air. And then he left, calmly. He made his way upstairs to a 2nd classroom. This one had been barricaded by terrified students, but that didn't stop him. A teacher who survived said he watched it happen. The shotgun blasting open the lock, the door crashing in, and then the shooter stepping inside, spraying bullets at everyone. It didn't feel real, the teacher said. I kept thinking, this cannot be happening. Not here. But it was. Screams followed, some filled with confusion, others with pure terror. Inside those classrooms, children were collapsing. Video later showed them, dozens of them, being led out by armed police. In the chaos, one young girl pulled out her phone and called her mom. Her voice was trembling as she cried, "Mama, Mama, I'm running for my life." Her mother later told reporters those words shattered her. It was so terrible, she said. You can't even imagine it. Another student witnessed something no one should ever have to see. He saw 3 of his classmates get shot right in front of him. Emergency calls had started coming in around 10 a.m. Frantic voices on the other end reporting gunshots, screams, panic inside the school. Within minutes, it was all hands on deck. The building was surrounded. Over 300 officers flooded the scene, including Austria's elite Cobra anti-terror unit. Sirens wailed, helicopters roared overhead, 65 ambulances roared in. More than 150 paramedics jumped into action. But when officers finally reached the classrooms, the damage had already been done. What they walked into was silence. Not the kind that calms you, but the kind that chokes you. Bodies on the floor, students too stunned to move, shaking. A nightmare had swept through the school, and it had left nothing untouched. Stretched across the pavement were the injured, some drifting in and out of consciousness, others already gone. The most critical victims were airlifted straight to Graz Regional Hospital. Emergency crews were already waiting, prepared, but not prepared enough for what was coming. As word spread, parents ran toward the school, some barefoot, some still in work uniforms, begging for answers. Were their children alive? Had they made it out? Police tried to help, directing families to a nearby hall where reunions, both joyous and tragic, began to unfold. One mother later described the moment her phone rang. Her teenage son was on the line, whispering, "There's someone shooting. I think I'm going to die." When confirmation finally came that he had survived, she collapsed. The relief, she says, didn't erase the trauma of those horrifying moments of silence.
It's unbelievable when you're sitting at home and don't know whether he's safe or not. That was distressing. And now I'm actually just thinking about how bad it is for the other parents.
A local restaurant owner, just a block from the school, said he knew something was terribly wrong when he heard the sirens and then the helicopters. "I've never seen so many emergency services in my entire life. Parents were walking by crying, just crying." The entire massacre lasted 7 minutes. But in that time, nearly 40 shots were fired. 10 people died instantly, including the gunman, who was found near the third-floor restroom with a self-inflicted gunshot wound. It was a final, cowardly act at the end of a rampage that has left an entire nation reeling. 5 others were rushed to the hospital in critical condition, while 2 adults were described as being on the edge of life and death. Hours later, the heartbreak deepened when a 59-year-old teacher died at the hospital. 9 of the victims were students, teenagers, just 14 to 17 years old. As names began to be released, each one carried not just an identity, but a life, a story, a set of dreams, and a family now marked by unimaginable grief. The first to be identified was Leah, a standout student with a bright future ahead of her. Her family described her as driven, full of hope, and deeply loved. Her grandfather, Muhabi, spoke with reporters, recalling the painful moment their worst fear became real. "We heard this happened in the morning, and everyone started calling, asking, 'Where's Leah?' We kept hoping it wasn't true. But at 2 p.m., my son called and said, 'Father, Leah has left us.'" Not long after, Hannah was also identified. Her family described her as brilliant, ambitious, a young woman who wanted to study medicine after finishing school. Her brother also spoke of the unbearable silence in the hours following the shooting.
Mit meiner Schwester zu sprechen und darüber zu reden, wie es war. Ich freute mich, beide zu sehen und war nach der Matura auf dem Weg. Als ich dann erfuhr, dass ein Amoklauf an ihrer Schule war, schrieb ich sofort. Sie meldete sich nicht und meine Sorgen wurden immer größer. Nach stundenlangem Warten auf eine Antwort wurde unser Gefühl leider bestätigt. Etwas, was ich aus einem Film kannte, erlebe ich gerade im echten Leben.
He couldn't hold back the tears. And when he finally spoke again, his voice cracked under the weight of it. More names followed, but not every family was ready to speak. Some chose to stay silent, keeping their grief private, shielded from cameras and news cycles, and sometimes that silence speaks the loudest. For several days after the attack, police withheld the shooter's identity, perhaps to give the investigation room to breathe or to spare an already traumatized public from spiraling even further. But eventually the name was released: Artur A., a 21-year-old Austrian citizen from Graz. This wasn't just a random location on a map to him. This school was personal. He had once walked those same hallways, sat in those classrooms, and stared out those windows. But his time there wasn't easy. He struggled in class, repeated 6th grade, and ultimately dropped out in 2022 without a diploma. From there, things only worsened. He couldn't keep a job, and when he applied to the Austrian Armed Forces, he was turned away, officially labeled mentally unfit for service. Artur had been living in Karlsdorf, a quiet town with a population of just 8,000. Yet somehow he seemed to pass through life without leaving a footprint. No clubs, no sports, little social media. For 5 years he existed in that space without really being seen. The mayor of Karlsdorf later described him as a very inconspicuous young man, someone so quiet and withdrawn that he almost went entirely unnoticed. A neighbor recalled that Artur always wore large headphones and carried a backpack, and that while he never said hello or made small talk, he wasn't rude or aggressive. Despite the horror that unfolded, Artur had no criminal history. In fact, the only mention of him in police records was as a victim of petty theft. But as investigators dug deeper, a darker side started to surface. While his offline world was empty, his digital life revealed something else entirely. He spent most of his time playing violent, first-person shooter games. But this wasn't just your typical gaming setup. For Artur, it was almost like training, studying. He wasn't just playing, he was preparing. And then it gets worse. Police discovered he had developed a deep obsession with mass shootings, especially Columbine. He followed online communities that glorified the Columbine killers, Eric Harris and Dylan Klebold, and yes, he posted about them. One of his comments under a post about the massacre simply read, "My hero." He wasn't hiding this, it was all out there. Just days before the attack, he uploaded photos of his guns to Tumblr. In one post, he called them his very early birthday present. Like this was something to be excited about. But here's the part that really hits. This wasn't spontaneous. Artur had been planning this for months. He legally bought a shotgun in April, then a handgun in May, both in Graz. And yes, he had a license, which means someone signed off saying he was mentally stable enough to own these weapons, even though the Austrian military had already rejected him for being mentally unfit. So there's a clear disconnect there. He also went to a local club 5 times in March, just practicing, quietly, no one noticed. Then, minutes before the shooting, he took one final photo of himself. You can see the tension in that photo, like he knew exactly what he was about to do. And just before it all went down, he sent a video to his mother, a goodbye. In it, he apologized for what he was about to do, said it was his choice, but didn't offer any kind of explanation, no motive, nothing. His mother didn't see the video until 24 minutes later. She immediately called the police, but by then, it was already too late. And here's where things get even more haunting. It turns out Artur did know some of the people that he killed. One of the girls who died, she lived in the same apartment building as him, just 1 floor above. Neighbors say they weren't sure if the two ever spoke, but still, the proximity adds a whole new layer of horror. She was right there. When investigators searched his apartment, what they found painted a chilling picture. There was a non-functional pipe bomb alongside what looked like abandoned plans for a bigger attack. He left behind a handwritten note laying out everything down to the smallest detail. It read like a blueprint, but interestingly, there was no date on it. Like he was still deciding when or waiting for the moment to feel right. Then there was another message, buried in all the chaos. One where he reportedly blamed the school and claimed bullying had driven him to this point. And in the same breath, he asked that someone take care of his cat. As more details surfaced, a few people who knew Artur began speaking to the media, some of them suggesting that this could have been an act of revenge. Maybe he snapped after failing to pass 6th form. They backed his claims that he had been bullied, mocked, and humiliated until he couldn't take it anymore. But here's the part that doesn't sit right. The students he killed had nothing to do with that. They weren't there when he was at school. They didn't bully him. Most of them probably didn't even know who he was. So why target them? That question still lingers. Police say Artur never expressed any outward anger toward the school, its students, or its teachers, not in public and not in private either. In fact, one officer said there were definitely no particular problems with him at this school. And yet, here we are. A community shattered, lives stolen, and a country still trying to understand how someone who barely made a sound could leave behind so much silence. Austria stood still, frozen in disbelief. You could feel the heartbreak in the air. A tragedy so unthinkable that even the nation's leaders struggled to find words that made sense of the senseless. But here's the thing. Austria isn't a stranger to firearms. In fact, it has one of the highest civilian gun ownership rates in Europe, about 30 guns for every 100 people. But school shootings, they're rare here, almost unheard of, and never on this scale. Chancellor Christian Stalker made his way to Graz and called it what it was, a dark day in the history of our country. President Alexander Van der Bellen followed with a statement that hit even harder. In response, the nation came to a complete stop. For 3 days, Austria entered mourning. Flags outside the Hofburg Palace hung at half-mast. Bells rang solemnly through St. Stephen's Cathedral. Trains, trams, buses, every form of public transport halted for 1 full minute of silence. Even ORF, the national broadcaster, went dark. No news, no hosts, just one message across every screen. The country is mourning. And in Graz, thousands gathered in the city's heart. They came with candles, with flowers, with tears. Total strangers held hands, hugged, cried together, struggling to make sense of something that will never feel right. And they didn't stop there. People showed up at hospitals, not for treatment, but to give, lining up to donate blood, hoping that maybe, just maybe, they could help save someone still fighting to survive.
Today I'm here because I wanted to do something. I felt helpless with the news, and I decided to come to at least give something from what I can give to the situation.
But just when Austria thought the worst was over, when they believed this nightmare was confirmed to a single day, a whisper began to spread. 2 more schools in Graz, including a nursery, had just been evacuated. Another threat, another minute of silence interrupted, and suddenly, everyone was asking the same terrifying question. Was this just the beginning? Do you think this was really about bullying or something darker? Drop your thoughts in the comments. And if this one shook you, what's coming next will leave you speechless. So hit like, subscribe, and turn on the bell.